Let's talk about quarterbacks in college football. One of them is a former quarterback. One is going to be a starter for one of the best teams in college football this coming season. Aaron Murray, former Georgia quarterback, had a huge statement about Arch Manning, the Texas quarterback. And so I want to talk about that a little bit and then just kind of talk about the quarterback landscape in the SEC and in college football because, look, Arch is getting hype. He's getting so much hype. Manning, the last name Manning, has some to do with that hype. But look, he's a very talented player that we got to see on display for a few games last season. Quinn Ewers, the starter for Texas, having kind of an injury-riddled season. So you saw Arch for a couple games, and you kind of saw him in some spots here and there and saw him in some rushing packages. But Aaron Murray, who, he does media now. He announces games. He's got podcasts and everything. He has questions for Arch Manning, questioning how good he really is. He had a pretty bold statement I'm going to share with you in just a second. Ryan Curley from Dawg. How do you get your own name wrong? Ryan Curley from Dawg asking you to check out dogpost.com, putting a lot of content out there. Make sure you're keeping up with our social channels, but dogpost.com and the Dogpost newsletter, that's really where it's at. So this is where Aaron, is put a little bit of doubt out there about Arch Manning. He said, if you're so good, why in the hell are you not playing above a 7th-round quarterback? Talking about Quinn Ewers there. And he suggested that the Longhorns roster was held back by Quinn Ewers' inconsistent play. So this was a kind of topic of contention is not a great way to put it, but the Texas quarterback situation was interesting a year ago, right? Quinn Ewers, former 5-star plus quarterback in his own right, plays for Texas, starts there for 3 seasons, and they were loyal to him, being the older quarterback with more experience. Ewers obviously has a lot of arm talent. He was Texas's guy. And there's pressure to play a guy like Arch Manning, who has the last name Manning, is a dual threat quarterback. See him flash some speed. Kind of reminds you of a rough comp I'd give him, comparison I'd give him is Trevor Lawrence. His play kind of is similar to Trevor Lawrence, and we know that Trevor Lawrence is one of the better college football quarterbacks of the century, right? So there was a little bit of quarterback drama there, especially when Ewers gets hurt. He goes down. You have to remember, Quinn Ewers started the season very hot, really balled out when Texas went up to Ann Arbor and pounded Michigan. There's hype about him being a Heisman contender, being a potential first-round pick. All of these things are on the table for Quinn Ewers when the college football season starts and, until he undergoes some injuries early on in the season. Well, in some garbage time spots, you saw Arch Manning, 5 for 6, 95 yards and a touchdown, 9 for 12, 223 yards and 4 touchdowns against UTSA. Against ULM, 2 touchdowns, two interceptions, not as great a completion percentage. Against Mississippi State, he started in an SEC game, 26 for 31, 325 yards, 2 touchdowns, a rushing touchdown. He had good numbers. So Arch Manning is hyped up to be one of the 2 or 3 best quarterbacks in college football this upcoming season by a lot of metrics. When you look at Heisman, when you look at the Heisman ballots, right? He got some of the best odds up there with Cade Klubnik, Drew Aller, Lenore Sellers, DJ Light, some of the other big-time quarterbacks in college football. Arch gets so much more hype than Gunnar Stockton. He gets more hype than John Mateer, a quarterback that transferred to Oklahoma, who I think is going to have a really good season. He gets more hype than Sellers. Honestly, I think he's getting a little bit more hype than Cade Klubnik, Clemson's quarterback, who is seen as a player that's going to be very, very good. Very good this season. Obviously, he's had a pretty solid career for Clemson so far. Gets more hype than Carson Beck, who is the most sought-after quarterback in the transfer portal. Him and John Mateer were. So he's getting more hype than all those players and projected as a potential first-round pick in this upcoming NFL draft as a kind of one-and-done starter at Texas is kind of how he's viewed. My prediction is that's not necessarily going to happen. I think that you probably see him stay for a second year as a starter because the NFL wants you to have that experience. But I think, look, it's a long off season, so I'm talking about stuff that's not all about Georgia. We're talking about Texas quarterback Arch Manning. But here's the thing: Georgia's got to play Texas. The Dogs and Longhorns are going to match up in November in Athens, and what I would be shocked if it doesn't end up being a night game. And we saw Arch play against Georgia a little bit, and you saw, it's tough to go out there and play when you're replacing somebody, and that's what he was. He was replacing a struggling Quinn Ewers. He goes out there for, a couple drives. He goes 3 for 6 against Georgia for 19 yards. He gets sacked a couple times. Georgia forced a turnover on him. You saw a hostile defense. His first real test against a hostile defense. The lights were too bright for Arch. Now, look, he's a redshirt freshman. He hadn't played against a big-time program like a Georgia quite yet at that point. He's replacing Quinn Ewers. It's not like you're the game plan starter where you're just ready. And you saw Gunnar Stockton, right, kind of handle that situation. So if you want to play devil's advocate, at the end of the day, no, I don't think Gunnar Stockton is as talented as Arch Manning, but I'm trying to put a little bit of a Georgia twist here in talking about this conversation. You saw Gunnar Stockton help his team beat Texas when he supplanted the injured Carson Beck and played in the second half, and you saw him kind of create a spark. Arch wasn't able to do that when Texas's offense was really struggling against Georgia's defense out in Austin. Quinn Ewers ends up going back in, plays a little bit better when he goes back in, gets some things going for Texas, but it still just wasn't enough. But is Arch really going to be the best quarterback in the SEC? I mean, I think there are some good quarterbacks. I think John Materi has an opportunity to be one of the best quarterbacks. I've mentioned to you all before, I think DJ Lagway of Florida, there's a lot of talent. DJ Lagway has a lot of talent, and if that offense can get rolling, I think you could see him have a pretty big year. If Lenore Sellers takes a step forward as a passer, because we know how elite of a runner Lenore Sellers is, does he have a huge year? I think that there's going to be really, really good quarterback play in the SEC this year. Last year, think about it. Think about the run of quarterbacks the SEC had recently. You had Bryce Young, Tua Tagovailoa, Joe Burrow, Stetson Bennett, Heisman finalist Stetson Bennett, Jaden Daniels, right? Just the season before, Heisman winner. I'm mentioning Heismans and Heisman runner-ups. I'm blanking on some other quarterbacks, but look, those are a few of the notable ones over the last few seasons. Last year, heading into it, it was Beck and Ewers, and they both kind of had underwhelming seasons. Not kind of. They both had underwhelming seasons. They weren't, Ewers and Beck, these were guys that were projected to be Heisman frontrunners and potential first-round picks. Ewers is a seventh-round pick. Carson Beck is going back to school and transferred to Miami. So that did not happen for either of those players. And then, DJ Lagway, he's in and out. Lenore Sellers, he emerges. Garrett Nussmeier, another player who's going to be one of the best players in college football probably this year. He has kind of an up and down season. Texas benches Connor Wigman for Marcel Reed at some point in their season. So a lot of changes happen. Jackson Arnold gets benched, and now he transferred to Auburn. This year it feels like, okay, if Gunnar Stockton's really good, he's going to be one of those guys. DJ Lagway, Lenore Sellers, Arch Manning, John Mateer. Does Jackson Arnold take a step forward at Auburn? I'm not as high on that notion. Nico Imaliava, he's out the door. So I think that the quarterback landscape in the SEC is a little bit more interesting this season. Is Aaron Murray's take a little lazy? Think about it this way. Justin Fields, Jake Fromm, JT Daniels, Stetson Bennett. There's been cases at Georgia where the better quarterback, doesn't win the job because why? Either they're not as experienced, there's some loyalty there, or they just don't think that the younger guy is the best fit player to be the quarterback. I think what you're going to see is a lot of quarterbacks that are inexperienced in the SEC this coming season, Arch Manning being one of them. But I think I think we're heading towards an electric quarterback year in the conference, which it's been a couple years since that's happened. Last year felt like a down year. What do you think about Aaron Murray's comments? Tried to twist it into a Georgia sense, talk about it, but I think it was an interesting conversation to have. Well, it is May. It's the off season. Thanks for watching. Ryan Kelly from Dawg Post. Appreciate you.